Continuing in my series of horror reviews for the final week of October, let's take a look at what I think is one of the more disturbing horror movies I've ever seen. This is the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, released in 1974, and is directed by Tobe Hooper. The movie follows a group of teenagers or early 20-year-olds as they're on a road trip through Texas. They pick up a hitchhiker and then let him free because he turns out to be kind of crazy. Then their van breaks down. They discover this old abandoned house, which is actually home to a family of psychopaths, and before you know it, each of the kids get killed off one after another. One thing I gotta say as a side note, with these slasher movies, I'm hesitant to call the victims kids because they're around my age, so it's like, you're not really a kid then. But anyway, that's something I wanted to address, especially when it comes to tomorrow's review. But back to Texas Chainsaw Massacre. My personal stance when it comes to horror movies is that a horror movie is more effective if I think about it for days. I get scared with supernatural horror movies like The Exorcist and The Conjuring, but with the exception of The Slender Man, supernatural horror doesn't really stick with me. Like, I'll be scared of it while watching the movie, and I'm willing to let go of my suspension of disbelief for the moment, but in a long-term stance, supernatural horror just doesn't do it for me. Texas Chainsaw Massacre, on the other hand, is a more effective horror movie for me because it's based around scenarios that could very well happen. It has a realism to it. In fact, this movie, much like Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, was loosely based off serial killer Ed Gein and the crazy shit that he's done. The movie has a very dirty, gritty look to it, which helps with the horror. It makes the movie feel a little more realistic and down to earth. And it's actually more of a psychological horror movie than it is a slasher movie. Even though the title is The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and going into it you would expect people to get massacred left and right, it's not really a bloodbath. In fact, I don't really think there's that much blood, if any, in the movie. Because the kills in this movie, they're effective, but they're more effective because they're just very quick and brutal, and sometimes they're left to your imagination. For example, the first time we see the character of Leatherface, he has a hammer that you beat meat with, and then he just knocks a guy over the head, and the guy just drops to the floor, and he's still twitching. The twitching element just makes it all the more creepy. And then he hangs a girl on a meat hook, and it's all implied. You don't see the hook impale her back, mainly because I don't think they had the money to show that kind of stuff, but because you don't see it, it's left to your imagination on how it looks, thus making it a little scarier. But getting back to the psychological aspect of it, it's a psychological horror movie because when we get to the last surviving character, she has to deal with all of these crazy nutcases who are really out of their mind. Probably the most iconic sequence in the entire movie, outside of the final chase, is the dinner scene where they have the main character tied down and everyone's acting completely over the top and crazy, which really could have come across as silly if done wrong. But given the right context and the fact that this is much later in the movie, it really comes across as scary. You want nothing to do with these people. You just want to get the fuck out of there, never come back again. And then the ending chase with Leatherface, in fact, every chase with Leatherface and his chainsaw is very effective, but mainly the finale, because this is the point where you're really rooting for the main character to get away. I mean, she does get away, spoiler alert for the 42-year-old movie, but the ending just leaves you with this uneasy feeling. You watch it, and then as soon as it cuts to credits, you go, well, shit. And that really is the definition of true horror, when you have to think about the movie for several days, because that's what I thought when I saw this movie for the very first time. It just left me with a very, very uneasy feeling because of the scenario that this is something that could very well happen if you're in the wrong area. Now, I am absolutely praising this movie, and rightfully so. It's one of the best horror movies out there. However, I cannot give it my highest rating because this is one of those scenarios that's like more of a personal preference for me. When a movie is so disturbing, it doesn't really make it all that fun to watch. Even though I do own the Texas Chainsaw Massacre on Blu-ray, it's not a movie that I will go back to over and over, because it's just that disturbing to watch. There's a very likely chance that this could, in fact, happen. So I will say, regardless of that personal issue I have, Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a movie that is definitely, without a doubt, worth seeing in your lifetime. If you want a true horror movie that really is a definition of the word horror, then the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is that movie for you. It's really gritty, realistic, and it'll stick with you for a couple days after watching it. And if you're curious on what I thought of the remake produced by Michael Bay, it's okay. Out of all the horror remakes that he produced, this is probably the best one. I mean, yes, it does have the Leatherface character. It's not as intense as the original movie. It has a cleaner look to it than the original movie. But I think it does deliver on a few terrifying scenes, especially with R. Lee Ermey's performance, who plays a character who was not in the original movie. So it has that going for it, but on the whole, just watch it at your own risk. Stick to the original. The original is the better movie. And that's my review for the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a comment down below and tell me what your thoughts are on the movie, if and when you've seen it. And as always, this is the real Mr. Robinson telling you, there is only one.